Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Nicole Show. It's me, Nick, your pocket neuroscientist. Today I'm going to be answering all of your dilemmas. This was supposed to go out in December. If you saw my video, I had a little bit of a meltdown with the recording side of things, and so I'm answering them today. Now, one of the things that I want to mention before we get into it is that I get a lot of questions around breakups, ghosting, rumination, and regrets and overthinking. I think those are my 5 top topics, and what's interesting is that the questions that came in all follow that same theme again, where you're struggling with regret, you're struggling with making the wrong decision, you're struggling with overthinking whether you made the right choice for yourself. And I can't wait to get into today so that we can delve into some of the things that are happening and how you can essentially alleviate yourself of this overthinking pattern where you try and overanalyze what you should have done. Now, I found this beautiful quote. For the life of me, I can't find where it is, so I'm just gonna try and recreate it. It says something about how our history doesn't really matter because we can't undo it, we can't change it. And so we're always looking backwards and we need to look forward, because when we look forward, we get to continue writing the narrative. Whereas when we look backwards, we hold on to the narratives that came from our past and we bring them into our present life. And I found that that was so interesting because it's really true. We only hold on to those narratives from the past because we're struggling to write the story in the present. Okay, so without further ado, Dear Nicole, what is the best? I love that you guys are writing Dear Nicole. What is the best way to interrupt negative thinking when it forms after being triggered by an emotion? Okay, so the first thing I'll say is that if you are being triggered by an emotion and it triggers negative thinking, I would call to assess what is your body trying to tell you. There are no bad emotions. I accidentally wrote bad in my book. I didn't mean to. One sentence out of the entire chapter, I was using negative and positive emotions. And then on one sentence, I wrote bad and good, and I got so many people messaging me telling me that there's no such thing as bad emotions. And yes, I absolutely agree. I'm a human that made a mistake. It's going to be fixed in the next print. And if you know me, you will know that I always refer to emotions as negative and positive, which has also come up in comments and conversations before. The reason we call it negative and positive emotions in neuroscience is because when we look at the evoked potential or the evoked response, we're looking at the electrical potential that the central nervous system is generating in the brain. They are essentially minute little electrical responses that are recorded in response to a stimulus. So when we give participants a visual of a negative image, we look at the evoked potential that comes from looking at that stimulus. And in science, we call it negative and positive because it is easier to differentiate and it is also less subjective. I had people commenting things like, some are uncomfortable, some are, you gave me different options for what they should be called. And I disagreed because that is more subjective. So love, for example, could be uncomfortable to some people who are not used to it, but is technically a positive emotion. And so we remove the subjectiveness from the emotions by calling them negative and positive. Not bad and good, like I actually did in that one single sentence in a 300-page book. So back to your question, there's no such thing as a bad emotion. It's just that your body and your brain are trying to tell you something. Maybe you are experiencing this emotion for a particular reason, which calls for attention. Now, to interrupt that negative thinking, there's a couple of things that you can do. One, you can do something like the physiological sigh, which will reinstate frontal cortex activity. It will communicate with your brain that you are no longer in a state of threat, and then you can deal with the emotion. You can also name the emotion. Accurately naming your emotion has been shown to activate the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which also in tandem switches off the amygdala responsible for threat detection. And so if you can accurately name how you're feeling, you're instilling some frontal cortex activity because you're having to generate a thought that pinpoints a logical solution to what you are feeling right there and then. And this is well documented in the literature. And then number 3, going outside or going for a walk or something that can essentially switch off that amygdala activity. So bilateral eye movements, especially when you're in forward undulation, when you're moving through space and time and there are images coming through past your eyes, that deactivates the amygdala because it activates the orbitofrontal cortex, which, as you can see, has the same tandem activity with the amygdala, meaning that when the frontal cortex is more switched on, the amygdala is less active. And so anything that can help you reinstate this activity so that you're essentially switching from frontal cortex activity, logical type thinking, away from the emotional brain thinking. Now, it's not as simplistic as that, please. The two work very well together to communicate how you are feeling. But for simplicity, I'm trying to show you that you can create this bridge between the frontal cortex and the emotional brain. And one thing that I was talking about with one of my friends that I love explaining is that you have the limbic system, which is responsible for emotions. You have the frontal cortex, quote unquote, more responsible for logical type thinking, higher order thinking, cognitively demanding tasks. And what happens over time when you gain emotional intelligence is that you create a bridge between the two. So the functional connectivity, so quite literally the white matter tracks that carry information between the two becomes bigger, becomes more developed, it becomes grosser in volume. And we've seen this again well established in the literature. The white matter volume increases in density. And so you have created a better highway of communication between the two. So you will still feel the emotions, you'll just be able to regulate for them a lot quicker. And you can do that by using those 3 tips that I told you. So gaining emotional intelligence is knowing that you're going to feel a particular way, but knowing how to get out of it. It's almost like creating a little ladder or an elevator. The way that I sometimes explain it is if you've got these levels of emotions and positive is at the top and negative is at the bottom, you know how to get between the two. You know how to get from place A to B by either climbing the ladder or getting into the elevator. Oh, that's a brilliant analogy. I love that. It's an original Nicole Vignola analogy. Okay, question number 2. Adulterous unconscious impulses in a happy and stable relationship. I love this question. And I love it because I spoke to Dr. Rena Malik. Please go and follow her on Instagram. She is incredible because she talks about really important topics like these. And I asked her this question because it was one of the questions that came up the most when I was running Sextober, predominantly from men, which is not necessarily a bad sign, but it was just interesting to see that the majority were coming from men that were having these sort of adulterous thoughts in their minds whilst being in a happy relationship. And the conclusion that we came to is that it is completely normal. But what it boils down to is that unless they are occupying your life, unless they are consuming you and they are overpowering your life and they are ruining your relationship, then the conclusion is that there is nothing wrong with them. And quite frankly, they are normal. They are completely normal. Now, again, I would pay attention to them. Maybe the fact that you are trying to push them away is the reason why you are having them more commonly, because it's almost like that resistance against something that you're not supposed to be doing, and thus you pay more attention to it. Whereas when you accept it and you accept that it's normal and maybe you can openly speak to your partner about it, it sort of alleviates that negative pressure from it and it normalizes it in the environment, in your brain, in your relationship. And so it becomes less intrusive in your life. So I definitely encourage you to pay attention to it. Like, is it overtaking your life? Is it making you want to do things that you shouldn't? If it's just thoughts and they're fantasies, absolutely fine. You can even bring them into your relationship. There are many couples that bring these fantasies into their relationship to amplify them. And if your partner is comfortable enough, they might want to explore that with you. Maybe speaking about it, maybe this video is going to help you normalize it, and you'll see that it alleviates that negative resistance from the topic. I hope that helps. Dear Nicole, I was wondering if you had any advice on dealing with regret and rumination. Yes, I do. I made a decision to take my dream job in the UK while my boyfriend decided to move to America. We decided to split up because we were going on different paths. The job didn't work out and I wanted to move over to my boyfriend almost immediately. He had meanwhile accepted the breakup and didn't want to get back together. I had a nervous breakdown, quite literally, and feel like my whole world has crumbled now that I lost my career path, my partner, and this imagined life in America. I am now back living in my childhood bedroom as I consider the next steps. Do you have any advice on how to accept what is and also to let go this imagined perfect path of going on with my partner, which now feels like it was the right decision in hindsight? Oh, okay. The first thing I'm going to say, and I'm just going to go straight in, is that perhaps you think that it was the perfect life and the right decision because everything else failed. If it had gone right, would you have wanted to move to America with your boyfriend and get back together? So that's the first thing that I would ask. I think you're probably just holding on to familiarity because you have quite literally lost everything. You've lost your job, you lost your career path, you've lost your boyfriend, you've lost this new life in the UK, you lost this potential life that you were going to live in America. And so you are probably trying to hold on to something that is familiar, which is your boyfriend or your ex-boyfriend. And that's completely normal because our basic psychological needs need to be met. And so you're probably clutching at something, but you can't change someone else's mind about whether they want to be with you or not. You have to accept this decision that he does not want to get back together. And I wrote it in Rewire, and I think that it's in these claustrophobic cracks where you really start to see that there is room for light. So the emptiness that you're feeling is uncomfortable, it's painful, it's hurtful. I know, I have been there. I also lived on my mother's sofa. I had moved back from doing a season in Ibiza and I was living on her couch, and it was not great. I've had worse, I definitely had worse. But in that emptiness, there's room for more. There's room for growth. And so the thing I would say to you is that whilst it is super uncomfortable and it is super painful, you can't change the past. What you decided was what you decided, and you can't go back on it. Your career path didn't work out in the UK, but it is absolutely going to work out somewhere else. Your ex-boyfriend doesn't want you back, but I promise you, there is somebody out there that is manifesting you right now, that is thinking about the kind of woman that he wants to be with. And that person exists. They are out there. And I know for a fact that you will find that person and you're going to look back and you're going to think, wow, that really was a place of growth, because sometimes it's only when we hit rock bottom do we realize that actually rock bottom is pretty stable. We have somewhere to go from, because for me personally, the way that I see it is when you're hitting rock bottom, you're falling and everything is out of control and everything feels very scary. Once you've hit rock bottom, it's solid ground. It's solid ground, and it sucks. And it's painful and it's dark down there. You're in this claustrophobic crack where you need to climb out of. But at least there's some comfort in knowing that you've hit solid ground and you can build back up from there. You are going to be absolutely fine. I know it for a fact. I've been there. There's a beautiful quote from Jean-Paul Sartre, and he says, "Life begins on the other side of despair." And I love that quote because for me personally, and for everyone around me that I've seen flourish, they always have one of these stories to tell where they had to hit rock bottom and despair, and then life began after that. So whilst it hurts, I am not worried about you at all. May you get the professional help you need and rewire those thought patterns, and I know that you're going to be fine. I'd love for you to check in a couple of weeks' time, in a couple of months, and hopefully I'll see a success story. I know I'm going to. Dear Nicole, should I date an 8-year younger guy? I'm 34 and he's 26. He's super kind, but I'm not sure if we want the same things. So interestingly, I'm sure they won't mind me sharing this, and you guys don't really know who they are anyway, but I used to nanny for a family, and the mother was 11 years older than the husband, and they had 2 kids. And I loved that. It took work. They went to therapy every single month, because there were differences, but I just loved seeing that situation work, you know, defining the laws of love, if you will. And I'm a huge dreamer, I'm a huge lover, I'm a huge lover of poetry. I believe in love, I just do. So, I think that relationships are hard. They're very, very tough, regardless of the situation, regardless of whether they are 8 years younger or not. I think fundamentally what it comes down to is maturity levels, how you see the world, and the balance in the dynamic. So is one person more codependent on the other person because they're younger? If this guy is 26 and he has himself together, he's got the values that you like, he's got the morals that you like, he has similar habits, he has similar viewpoints on life, I already said views, then I think it could work. There might be some differences, And the question that I'm going to ask you is, are you willing to put enough energy into ironing those differences out and accept that some of them will never be ironed out? Because that's the other thing about relationships, is that it is sacrifice to some degree. There are obviously levels to this. You should not sacrifice your well-being, for example, for somebody else. But the age thing does not necessarily need to be a problem. I think the best way that you could figure it out is by having an honest conversation with each other about where you see yourself. And so I think you need to figure out what are the most important things to you, what are the most important questions, and where does this person lack and where does this person give, and are you guys willing to find a middle ground? So I don't think that age needs to be an issue, but I think that it needs to be definitely spoken about thoroughly to make sure that you're both on the same page. Because I find that what happens is sometimes we have these elephants in the room and we ignore them, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and as time passes, the disparity separates people even more. The gap between those differences becomes bigger and more evident until you can no longer ignore it. So if I were you, I would address that right now. If you are not on the same page, then you could look at it two ways. You could enjoy it for what it is and then wave your goodbyes when you are both ready. But as they say, the longer you stay on the wrong train, the more expensive it is to get back. Have that conversation now in the early days of your relationship, and don't be afraid to just enjoy somebody for who they are and what they brought to you. Because sometimes we hold on to the future and what could have been and what should be, and we start to sort of play it up in our heads about what this relationship could be. Whereas I just want you to focus on what this relationship is. And if it doesn't work out, it's absolutely fine. It was something that you enjoyed, a chapter of your life that you now get to close and move on to something else. This is how I personally look at life, so I hope that helps. Dear Nicole, how do I stop being a people pleaser and become a little bit more self-focused? The people-pleasing behavior. Right, I'm going to make you feel very seen. I'm going to validate you. People-pleasing was a very normal survival instinct to humanity. We had to please in our tribes, we had to get along in our tribes, or you would be exiled. For centuries, we lived in small tribes. Around 95 to 99% of human history, we lived in small tribes and small tight-knit communities, which required us to people please because we had to get along with one another. So we had to adjust to other people's all of the single time. Now we live in a society where we don't have to people please. We get to say how we feel and we don't get exiled. And if we do get exiled, there's another group that will accept us because we have the ability to find different groups. We are not reliant on basic survival like hunting for our food and basic warmth, etc. And so evolutionarily speaking, it is deeply ingrained into our human psyche and our genetics. So I hope that alleviates some of the reasoning as to why you are a people pleaser. It is somewhat completely normal. You may have an exacerbated ability to people please or an unhealthy way of people pleasing, which then impacts your own well-being. This people pleasing behavior could be exacerbated from previous experiences. Maybe you have fear of rejection. Maybe you have a deep desire for approval. Maybe your parents never made you feel seen. And there's a variety of reasons why we might be people pleasers. And I think we all genetically, inherently hold this ability to people please. There are obviously levels of it, and you may sit on the spectrum where you are borderline psychopathic and you don't care, and that's not good, or you're on the other side of the spectrum where you forfeit your own well-being for other people, and you want to sort of bring this into a more normal range, if you will. Okay, so that's the way that I would see it. We have the spectrum and either side is not good within the norm, and you're going to have to figure out what the norm is and what you're willing to accept. And you might want to start small and then every year add more boundaries in and figure out how to make this range a little bit smaller so that you're living in this happy balance of somewhat people pleasing, of course, but also not at your own detriment, if you will. So question number one is, I would understand the root cause of why you people please. And then number two, I would figure out how is it manifesting in your life. When you start to see the actions that you are performing, it is easier to then change them because you can actually pinpoint the behavior or the action that you're performing, and therefore you are able to bring some attention to it. So number one, what is the root cause? Number two, how is it manifesting in your life? Number three is start to learn to say no. And also there's two parts to this, is pay attention to all the times that you say yes out of habit. Sometimes we say yes out of habit, or we say yes out of fear. So I was working with a client who would always say yes to things, and he was super burnt out. So all we did is we started practicing what he would do in the workplace when someone came and asked him for something. And he would practice saying things like, hey, thank you so much for asking. I actually don't have the capacity right now. Could you pass this on to this department? Just that simple rehearsal of a sentence would help my client to not automatically jump to the answer that they would always give, which is yes, out of habit, out of automaticity, without thinking. How many times have you said yes and then thought, why did I just say that? I think learning to prioritize your needs is super important as well, but you know that, of course, and that's kind of like, saying the obvious, but you need to figure out what are your needs, and are you putting other people's needs in front of your own needs, and what are the needs that you can pinpoint that you need to change. And then the last thing is to tolerate that discomfort. While you're making this change, it's going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to want to say no, but, and then go on this long rant explaining why. And I think it's good to give people an explanation. I hate those people that are like, just say no and don't explain. I think, personally, if my friend said they wouldn't want to hang out with me, I'd kind of want to know why, because I have cultivated very, very nice friendships. So I would be a little bit confused. I also understand that if my friend did not want to give me one, that something would be inherently wrong. So I think it is nice to explain, but you don't have to over-explain, okay? So there's going to be a level of discomfort where you're going to think this is completely out of character for me. I'm going to want to people please by over-explaining my decisions, but you can just say, no, I have plans this weekend, but thank you so much for asking me, or whatever it is that you are trying to change. I hope this helps. Guys, if I haven't answered your dilemma today, then please look out for it at the end of the month. I had a bit of a backlog with the cluster mess that I had from December, so please bear with me. It will come out at the end of the month. I hope that I've answered your questions. As always, there's a little form in the caption. If you have any additional dilemmas, if you want to send this to your friends, then please drop your dilemmas in the questionnaire and I will answer them for you twice a month, every single month. Guys, thank you so much for listening, and I hope that this is helpful. I would love to hear from you in the comments, or if you prefer to DM me on Instagram. I do my best to read every single one of them. I want to know if this was helpful. I want to know that I'm actually creating an impact in your life. Guys, thank you so much, and don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. It's me, Nick, your pocket neuroscientist.